Winter, 1812. After a disastrous opening to the war, the tide seems like it finally may be turning for the United States. Following several humiliating defeats on the frontier and growing Canadian strength, U.S. armies are joining up with Confederation forces to take on the British. But as they gear up, news of British victories continue to roll in. In the Northeast, the entire territory of Maine has been conquered by the British. A last holdout in Portsmouth stalls any further advance, but well-trained reinforcements from England will soon arrive to overwhelm American defenses. Meanwhile, the British force on the Niagara Peninsula throws back an overeager native attack, inflicting hundreds of casualties and scattering several Indian warbands. Over on the St. Lawrence, the British have outmaneuvered the Americans and captured territory up to the end of Lake Champlain. Hoping to keep up the momentum, the British Army advances on Albany, but are met by a large American force dug in at Saratoga. Outnumbered on the whole, the British hope to use their cavalry superiority to destroy the American artillery and pave the way for future attacks. But in a running battle, American militia and regulars alike fend off charge after charge. When the British line finally advances, they are cut to pieces by the still intact American guns. With the British cavalry spent, an American company of New Hampshire cavalry spots an opportunity and launches an attack, cutting down an isolated regiment of British regulars. With the battle growing too costly and American reinforcements arriving on the field, the British line withdraws. Though a relatively unimpressive victory, for the first time, the United States has thrown back the enemy, and to their joy, Tecumseh has seemingly surrounded the British force, held up at Queenston. But an American informant brings troubling news. Tecumseh has bypassed the British positions, and is now marching with the Redcoats to strike Americans holding south of Lake Ontario. Panic begins to spread throughout Congress, as news soon reaches them that the Red Stick nations are preparing to join the war after native successes on the frontier. The call goes out across the colonies to defend their home. Thousands answer the call, and this mass wave of militia couldn't be more fortunately timed. While the British have crossed the Niagara, their native allies, after demanding 2 companies' worth of horses be handed over, abandon the campaign and move south to face the still intact militia force gathering in Pennsylvania. This leaves the British offensive dangerously divided. The force on the St. Lawrence, unwilling to face the massive American army alone, pulls back into Canada to wait for an opportunity to launch a joint attack. But to the west, the British advance is facing problems of its own. Their militia, far from home, and disheartened by the sudden loss of their native allies, refuse to advance. It takes a week to convince them to get underway, but the delay will cost the campaign dearly. The British are now isolated in the enemy country, without allies, and vulnerable to a counterattack. To stop this, the British force in Canada decides something must be done and launches an attack over the St. Lawrence River. The British face a daunting task. The Americans not only outnumber them, but also hold the artillery advantage. Debate amongst officers on how to proceed is fierce. If they cross into a prepared American position, they will be caught deploying and destroyed. But the British will have the element of surprise. American forces are likely to be spread out to guard the many fords across the river. The Canadian Army also holds a massive superiority in cavalry, making any unguarded crossing a serious crack in the American defensive line. After much debate, it is decided that in the early dawn, they will cross south over the most isolated ford to form a beachhead and lever the Americans from the field. It is a narrow, exposed causeway, and the British will have to cross one regiment at a time. It is hoped that such a brazen attack will be written off by the Americans as unthinkable, leaving the defenses undermanned and vulnerable. In the early morning, the army prepares for battle. 2 companies of light dragoons lay in wait to the north, while a battalion of infantry make fake preparations to cross. Then, the signal is given. British infantry lead the way and rush across the causeway. They catch a lone regiment of militia off guard and rout them before they fire a single shot. U.S. cavalry stop the pursuit, buying time for the militia to reform and prepare a defense, though they are soon scattered by a British cannonade. The crossing is made. Infantry and cavalry are now pouring over the causeway. The American position is sure to collapse. But, while the British think they are on the verge of overwhelming the American position, reinforcements begin to march into view. The American commanders had scouted British positions earlier that morning and noticed the lack of activity. Guessing an attack to be imminent, the entire American line has already abandoned their positions and are en route toward the beachhead. Still unaware of their perilous position, the British advanced guard begins to trade volleys with the state militia. It is the thinnest point of the terrain. British numbers cannot be brought up. Though their aim far surpasses the American militia, the infamous buckshot used on the frontier is proving particularly deadly at close range, forcing the British to remain at a distance. For several crucial minutes, the militia hold their ground. It is only when a battery of 6-pounders is brought up that the line is forced to retreat. But the delay has cost the British much of their numerical advantage. The 250 Americans originally guarding the ford have ballooned to nearly 3,000 men. They now hold 2 defensive lines, anchored by a fortified house, and now supported by a 5-inch howitzer. The British vanguard makes a charge, hoping to push the Americans back before the defensive lines can be finished. But they are shattered under a hail of lead. Canadian troops push up to take their place. They plan to use their artillery to blast the militia away with waves of canister. But a lucky shot from the howitzers disables the battery. This is a serious setback. It will take a while to limber and transport the second battery across the river, and the situation on the beachhead is not improving. The American artillery has now fully deployed. Howitzers and round shot rip through the exposed British ranks. The Redcoats make a desperate push, storming the house and pushing back the first line. But they are stopped in turn by canister fire from the second line. The attack is remade, now on the American right. British cavalry thunder towards the American militia, but entrenched in dense woods and supported by American guns, they throw back the British dragoons and further stall the advance. In an attempt to get behind the Americans, light dragoons cross the northern fords unopposed and sweep around the U.S. flank, but they are met and scattered by a waiting American militia. The British commander has one last card to play. Packing their last reserves into one final attack column, they charge the American left, held by the 5th Battalion of Maryland Militia. The red tide crashes into the line and scatters the Marylanders. But as they turn to charge the American guns, a company of United States light cavalry charges their exposed flank. Caught by surprise, the British are scattered. Their general flees. The line is rolled up. Morale collapses. Soon, the whole British army is in retreat. The Second Battle of the St. Lawrence has been a costly affair, with more than 1,000 casualties on both sides. But, defeated and demoralized, with several regular units completely destroyed, much of the Canadian militia abandoned the army. The Americans have won a decisive victory. The threat of British forces uniting has passed. With the initiative back in their corner, the United States is ready to strike back.